fabulous to see all of you here today for another Odyssey book club meeting. I hope that those of you that came in did have a chance to answer the poll that Professor MacRae just launched. We'll have an opportunity to talk more about that soon. In the meantime, I'd like to just give us a brief recap of books 5 through 8 for those of you who maybe read it close to the beginning of the week or maybe haven't read it in a minute. Last time we discussed books 1 through 4. So there we were really thinking about life back home, Ithaca, Telemachus, Penelope, and all of the heroes that were actually able to make it back from Troy. Today in books 5 through 8, we finally get to meet Odysseus and we pick up with his adventure. So book 5 begins much like book 1 with a council of the gods on Olympus, deciding that it's finally time for Odysseus to come home. Zeus sends Hermes, the messenger god, down to the Calypso's island. And there he finds her in her cave, her marvelous garden cave. Though she doesn't want to, she does agree to send Odysseus on his way. And she gives him the supplies, the lumber, and the tools to build a raft. He sets sail. Once at sea, though, Poseidon quickly spies him, whips up a storm, and destroys his raft entirely. But Odysseus is still able to reach the shores of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, with the help of goddesses Ino and Athena. Book 6 begins on Scheria in the palace of Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians. We start more specifically in the bedroom of his daughter Nausicaa, where Athena, who's disguised herself as a mortal woman, stands over her as she sleeps and urges her to go wash her clothes at the river. Nausicaa obeys and goes down to the washing basins together with her attendants. There, they wash the clothes, they bathe, they picnic, they dance. The sound of their game wakes up Odysseus, who is sleeping nearby. He emerges naked and covered in brine and supplicates Nausicaa to clothe him and show him to town. Nausicaa agrees to help him and tells him how to reach her father's palace without attracting any of the attention of the Phaeacians. The whole book is suffused with references to marriage. At the beginning of book 7, Odysseus leaves Athena's grove, where he's been waiting under Nausicaa's instructions, to set out to find Alcinous's palace. Athena finds him, pours mist over him so that none of the Phaeacians can see him, and then intercepts him, now disguised again as a young maiden. She shows him the way to Alcinous's palace and gives him a brief family history of Alcinous and, perhaps more importantly, his wife Arete. Odysseus reaches the palace and marvels. The structure is wrought in precious metal, and the surrounding estate is filled with vegetation that defies seasonality. Once in the palace, he finds Arete, supplicates her, and in response, Alcinous calls on the community of Phaeacian elders to help bring about a homecoming for Odysseus. Arete begins to question Odysseus, but shortly afterwards they prepare for bed and all go to sleep. Book 8 begins with the following morning at a council of the Phaeacians that Alcinous calls to bring about this homecoming. They adjourn and begin to feast in Alcinous's halls, where the bard Demodocus sings a story of Odysseus's quarrel with Achilles. Odysseus begins to cry, and when Alcinous notices, he suggests a change in activity. Maybe athletic competition would be more pleasing to this guest. Once there, the younger men challenge Odysseus to take part in the athletic competitions. He easily surpasses them in a game of discus. The Phaeacians dance for Odysseus, and soon he even requests another song from Demodocus, again about the Trojan War. When he begins to weep, Alcinous asks him, finally, to tell him at last who he is, where he's been, and where he's going. So when we pick up next time, these are the questions we'll hear Odysseus answer in his own narrative in books 9 through 12. But today, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Duncan MacRae, who's here with us to discuss books 5 through 8. Professor MacRae is an associate professor of ancient Greek and Roman studies here at UC Berkeley. He is also a participating faculty member in ancient history and Mediterranean archaeology and in the Berkeley Center for Jewish Studies. He is currently co-director of the Berkeley Center for the Study of Religion. He was educated in Dublin and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and came to Berkeley in 2016. His main field of study is Roman history and the history of ancient religion more broadly. Professor MacRae, it's wonderful to have you here. I open the floor to you to help us discuss books 5 through 8.
Thank you, Cecily. I'm extremely excited. It's amazing to see everybody on the Zoom screen. It's really, I had heard rumor of it, and I had been watching along on YouTube after the previous two meetings. But it's rather overwhelming to be here with you all. So I'm very excited about this. The Odyssey has always been one of my favorite books since I was really a small child, and I first read a children's version, which, as you can imagine, was relatively sanitized. And I've come back to it again and again. And Homer was one of the reasons I tried to learn ancient Greek for the first time. I think I mostly succeeded. So here is my proposed order of business. I wanted to sort of change this up a bit. And I was really enthusiastic about the idea of participating in a book club. I've never really been in a book club. I've always wanted to be in a book club. I'd be probably not the best kind of book club companion over a long time, but I'm very excited about the book club aspects of this. So I want to center the book club a little bit first, and then I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes. But in the interest of centering the book club, I wanted to start first with some questions that came in earlier this week. Then I want to look at the poll that should still be open and you should still be able to answer, I believe. I'm hoping. And then I will answer this question for myself, and I will talk a little bit about books 5 to 8 of the Odyssey. So I just want to start with then one of the questions that came in, and I really could not have asked for a better question. In fact, I sort of wonder if my subconscious slipped someone $20 to ask this rather. So Richard asks, in the Odyssey, all the characters accept the power and the reality of the gods. The power of the gods is apparent to the reader on virtually every page. But how about Homer's audience? Other people ask some questions about fate and free will and what the audience might have expected in terms of fate and free will. More specifically, one person asked an excellent question about the god Poseidon. Poseidon is so vindictive against Odysseus, and as we're going to see, there's even really a strong possibility that he's going to be vindictive against the Phaeacians for helping Odysseus, even though Poseidon is one of the ancestors of the Phaeacians. And so I want to tell you to hold your horses on Poseidon. The offense of Odysseus against Poseidon is explained in the books to come, but not yet by book 8. But back to the gods. Did Homer's audience really believe in the gods? This is a wonderful question. Now, it raises all sorts of things that are very interesting to me and my guys as a historian of religion. So one of the more complicated questions is, what does any group of people believe about the world? For example, I think I would be interested to know how many of you would know what polling says about American belief. For example, in contemporary America, the Pew Religion Survey, which is the most authoritative survey, says that 83% of American adults say that they believe in God or a main higher power, which I think instinctively is probably a number much higher than we would perhaps expect. This changes hugely in terms of age group. So younger people have a somewhat lower percentage of belief in God, and your older people have a higher percentage. And whatever our expectations of this American number of 83% believing in God, I think one useful corrective that it gives is the problem of characterizing a single society in terms of what people believe, especially about like the non-evident, the divine. So if you ask the same question of today, do Americans believe in God? I think the answer would have to be yes. But I think also many of us would find that a sort of inadequate answer, right? It's not just about what the majority think, right? So I want to first point out the difficulty of characterizing an entire society's um, sort of mental beliefs about the not evident. The second thing, which is uh, somewhat complicated is that I think it's really hard for us to get our heads around ancient religion in general. And that's mostly for two reasons, is that we dwell in a world in which there are two really strong competitors for basic understanding about how the world works. The most dominant, the secular scientific worldview of naturalistic worldview, suggests that the world is entirely natural, that this is what there is, the universe, uh, space, chemical elements, evolution, right? That's the naturalistic worldview. And it can be entirely compatible with this. The main competitor for that naturalistic worldview in the present is basically some kind of transcendental view. The idea that if there is a deity, the deity transcends, goes beyond the world as it is. Um, that is not neither of those ideas, the naturalistic and the transcendent, were really available to the ancient Greeks. Instead, like most of humanity in most of history, the ancient Greeks assumed the divine was immanent. That's a way of saying that it was they assumed that the gods were in the world with them. And one of the corollaries of this view of the divine as being immanent is also a view of the divine as being a kind of person. A very famous anthropologist called Marshall Salins once said that ancient the 90% of humanity have believed in immanent deities, and they have believed in the idea that gods are meta persons. And meta persons is a very fancy anthropological way of saying that gods are people too. And that really is the world of the ancient Greeks, and for that matter, the ancient Romans, which is the idea that the gods are people and they have views like people. They have desires, wants, they have travels, right? There's that brilliant, brilliant metaphor right at the beginning of book five of the travels of Hermes to the island of Calypso. It says he skimmed along the breakers like nothing so much as a tern, which drenches its thick plumage in the brine as it hunts for fish, down through the troughs of the breakers on the restless wastes of the sea. That's how Hermes looked as he darted through wave after wave. Hermes is a person. He moves through space and time. He is not transcendent, like perhaps a modern deity might be, a modern idea of a deity might be. So the Greeks assumed that the gods were persons, but they also assumed that they were more powerful than us humans. And that brings us to fate. It's pretty clear in both Homeric poems, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, that basically what Zeus says goes. He is the king of the gods, and his word is a kind of divine authorization, a divine law, which basically says the fate of things. Once Athena has persuaded him in book one that Odysseus should go home, that is what is going to happen, no matter what Poseidon, who is a very lively person in poem, thinks. So I hope that that gets at Richard's question. I think for the audience of this poem, just as for the characters of this poem, the gods were immanent persons. They were with us in the world, and that's just what they thought and what they assumed. Another set of questions that came in was really fascinating to me because the a pair of questions came in that really asked opposite questions. So Hari said, uh, what about the technologically advanced phaeacians who feel that they are just, but are ultimately xenophobic and engage in Xenia guest friendship out of fear of Zeus more than any inner core good principle of being good hosts? Right? So this is a view that the Phaeacians are xenophobic, that they aren't very nice to Odysseus when he turns up. A different person, Pam, wrote in to say, I'm curious to learn more about the Greek culture of hospitality. I understand that there is a tradition to welcome strangers, feed them, etc. The welcome of Odysseus just seems over the top. Why the lavish festivities? Was this standard practice for every stranger? Why did Odysseus get such amazing treatment? I think that's a wonderful pair of questions, and I think in both cases, very perceptive. So, as you will have noticed, in books, especially books 7 to 8, there is a lot of to do with the reception. But even in book 6 with Nausicaa, there's a lot of to do with the reception of Odysseus as a stranger into the city of the Phaeacians and especially into the palace of Alcinous. And certainly uh, this is a very elaborate ritual of reception of a stranger. And it does seem that probably that is the way that strangers were supposed to be received in the world of the Homeric poets, in the world of the 8th, 7th, and 6th centuries BCE in Greece. And essentially, what the ideal is that a stranger would be brought into the house, would be given the chance to wash and be given the chance to sleep, and then ultimately would be fed. And only after they were fed was it really then good manners to ask who they were. And then the expectation for the stranger was that the stranger would then answer and answer truthfully. That's very important. One is not supposed to lie. At that point, once you have been asked who you are, you must tell the truth. And ultimately, that is the pattern that we see with the Phaeacians. Odysseus is welcomed and fed, and ultimately asked, "Who exactly are you?" And then he begins to speak, and then that goes into book 9 of the Odyssey. On the other hand, as Hari noticed, and quite a few readers of the poem have noticed, there is something consistently off about the Phaeacians. And this really starts actually from book 6, when Nausicaa starts to talk with Odysseus. Firstly, Odysseus really worries when he first lands, and this is on page 160. Where have I landed this time? Among what kind of people? Are they insolent? Are they savage without any notice of justice? Or do they welcome strangers? So he starts off worried about the kind of welcome he's going to get. And then he eventually meets Nausicaa and supplicates her, and she says, well, there isn't a man alive, nor will there ever be one who would make his way to the land to the land that belongs to the Phaeacian men, bringing the strife of battle, for the immortals love us dearly. We live far out in the midst of the surging surf of the sea, at the ends of the earth, and no one ever has dealings with us. Right? So she assumes actually that the Phaeacians are not the kind of people who ever receive strangers. Strangers never come to the Phaeacians, she says. And then later in the book, this is on page 165, she's explaining that she doesn't want to go into town with Odysseus. And she says, I I'd prefer to avoid their sharp tongues when we get there. This is line 273 or so. For I fear that people will talk. There are many high-handed people among us, and some lowlife who chanced upon us could well say something like, so who's that big handsome man following Nausicaa? A stranger. Where did she find him? A future husband, no doubt. I suppose she's gone and taken some wanderer off his ship. Some foreigner, of course, since there's no one anywhere near us. Right? And so Nausicaa imagines a profoundly xenophobic reaction to her turning up in town with Odysseus. This continues on and on. There's one point, very interesting point in book 7, where Alcinous seems to be asking Odysseus who he is well before it's time, well before they've had the meal and they're supposed to be able to ask him. He sort of says, well, maybe you're a god, but maybe we can know who you are, and Odysseus demurs, right? There's also the strange scene with the discus where the young men challenge Odysseus, which is not really what you should do with a stranger. And one of them says, you seem like a merchant. You seem like someone who's used to rowing around selling goods. So there's a lot of uncanny stuff here with about exactly um how the phaeacians receive uh Odysseus. It's quite sort of there's an undercurrent that maybe they aren't good hosts. Ultimately, they will help out Odysseus, but the whole charge in these books, I think, comes from the fact that on the one hand, we know that the Phaeacians are sort of destined to help Odysseus home. We know that the poem is quite clear that that's what's going to happen. But what we worry consistently is that they are going to turn on him, that they are not going to be hosts, that he really has turned up in a land where people are savage and don't believe in justice. And the tension of these books is partly this um, pull between the expectations of Xenia of guest friendship and the slightly strange or off reception that Odysseus gets. So I think these were really fantastic questions, and thank you so much for pre-submitting them. I realize that only some people have the chance to read ahead and get their questions in time for us to talk about here. So I did want to broaden it out and use the Zoom poll. I I'm hoping that people can see the Zoom poll still, but if you can't, perhaps this QR code will be visible to you and can help. I'm hoping. I'm going to give you another 1 or 2 minutes to answer the poll if you haven't. I see 67 answers. This has also given me a moment to look at the chat, and several people have pointed out that the guest host culture can be found in other human societies, including some today, and that's absolutely true. One thing that we can say about this kind of guest culture is that it's very common when the state is weak. Um, if you have a sort of good society set up, good social setup, um, one doesn't need a guest culture like this. This is a culture that springs up in the absence of a kind of security provided by a sort of impartial third group. And so yeah, it's still prevalent in places where um, an impartial state is not a sure thing, and so treating strangers warmly is a good way to deal with the problems that might arise. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results so everybody can see what other people said. Has that been shared, Cecily? Can you see the results, Cecily? Oh, oh, you can only see one's own. Okay. That's so sad. I was really hoping that I would be able to see everybody's results.
Duncan, I can share my screen. I think I have everyone's results. Give me a second.
I really want to know what struck people. I'm actually desperate for the answers, is the big deal here. Oh, that's great.
Wow. I love the graphic too.
Can we just make it a little bit bigger, Renee?
I'll try, but you're better at this than I am.
Just on the Zoom on the browser. Okay, I see. One person said Athena's super steady support of Odysseus. It's really fascinating. I had this whole realization as I was rereading for this, and it's been a long time actually since I read through the Odyssey from beginning to end. And I read the first four books with you all, and then I picked up with these four. It is striking to me how much I love Athena as a character in this poem. She is an amazing helper, right? She is consistently really part of the narrative and driving it on and constantly in disguise. Think about all the different people she's appeared as just already in just 8 books, pushing Odysseus' story along. Homer seems to value powerful women, certainly Queen Arete. Um, uh, this is a real test of everybody's eyesight. Uh, there's peacocking. Someone mentions the incest, so it is noticeable and it would be surprising to us. But Alcinous is married to his niece, but this seems to have been sort of typical of the aristocratic families of ancient Greece, is that they practice endogamy. They're deeply worried about people marrying in from the outside, and therefore it's much more comfortable to marry someone who's a closer relation. People mention Athena, how he spent a whole book on songs and contests. Yes, but one has to remember that Homer himself is a poet. So having a star poet do star turns as a poet might have been attractive to Homer if it's not to us. Uh, how much power Arete seems to have, the role of the gods I see. How much eating there is. Yeah, this has always been noticed about the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a poem of digestion. People are constantly eating, and as we'll see, especially in the next 4 books that we haven't yet read, there's a lot of disordered eating. Eating is definitely a huge part of this poem, and that's partly because of the importance of guest friendship, of these kind of receipt of the stranger. Um, One person says that they really enjoyed the Mendelssohn translation more than any others. I agree. I have found it really nice to read. Um, Nausicaa playing at the riverside seemed like a setting for for a god to enter, but of course it's Odysseus. Uh, there's the self-navigating ships of Alcinous. This is all really fascinating, and I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So thank you so much for participating in the poll. I think it's fascinating to me how many different things people have found intriguing or surprising. And also, it's really comforting to see that other people are fascinated by the things I'm fascinated by. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen one more time, and I just want to, I'm hoping that you can see that all. Okay. So, what is going on? I'm a Roman historian, and you have just done 2 sessions in which you met my colleague Leslie Kirk, my incredibly treasured colleague Leslie Kirk. And Leslie is one of the great uh, American readers of Greek poetry who's actually ever lived, like ever. She is one of the she's a superstar scholar of Greek poetry. I am not. So one thing is I'm going to say that for the next 30 minutes or so, you're in the hands of someone who is decidedly less expert than Leslie about Homer and about pretty much everything. Instead, I wanted to sort of be part of the book club for a little bit and sort of give you my kind of personal take on these 4 books and what in some ways I found intriguing in them. I'm a Roman historian, and that means I care very much about central Italy and particularly the city of Rome. And I've spent my career researching and writing about Romans and Roman literature, largely Latin literature. I'm incredibly fortunate. I grew up in South London, and when you grow up in Northern Europe, which has, I hate to tell you, terrible weather, a key thing, if you have the ability, is to go to the Mediterranean on holiday. And in particular, I have been very lucky, especially as a child, to spend a lot of time in the Western Mediterranean. Ah, this is Cap d'Aille on the south of France, and this is where I did my sleepaway camp when I was a child, in a really lovely French-speaking camp. And as you can see, it's right by the Mediterranean Sea. It's right by the cliffs of the Mediterranean. the beaches, but also this good life of the south of France, the mansions, the coffee shops, a very civilized place. I've also been lucky enough to spend a lot of time in the hills of Italy, and this is literally a holiday photo of mine from a balcony of a place that I've managed to spend a lot of time in my life. And what I partly wanted to show you is not only the beautiful sunset over the Tuscan hills, but the olive grove in front. It's very important to understand that the olive grove is the visual signature on some level of the Mediterranean Sea, especially the Western Mediterranean Sea. Olives can only grow in very particular climatic conditions. They can't grow at high altitude. They need to be somewhat close to the sea. And so when you leave the region of olive growth, you are leaving the Mediterranean. Of course, many of you will be Californians and know full well that olives can also grow in California, and that's one of the many bonds between ourselves and the ancient Greek world, is that we live in sort of this climatically similar vein. But this is my Western Mediterranean, a Western Mediterranean of the good life in the French Riviera or the olive groves in the hills of Italy. What I want to emphasize is this is not the Mediterranean of the Western Mediterranean of the Odyssey. I think that these four books, sorry, 5 to 8, absolutely take place in the Western Mediterranean. It's quite clear that they are taking place in a space that is by the sea, and in fact by the sea that the Greeks also lived by, but far away, very far away. The distance is really emphasized. I already quoted that really incredible simile of Hermes passing through the waves, but he has to travel a very long way, and then when he gets there, Calypso recognizes him as a god, and the narrator says that's the way gods are. They can always recognize each other, even ones who live very far away from each other, right? So Calypso is out there in the Western Mediterranean. Similarly, the land of the Phaeacians, the island of Scheria, is quite clearly a kind of Western Mediterranean island. Very distant from the regular Greeks, but also clearly part of the same sea, and also they are clearly kind of Greeks. They have the same rules, the same language. They're not depicted as un-Greek. I want to emphasize that this is the Western Mediterranean, but this is the Western Mediterranean as pretty much a fantastical place. Something like the Wild West of the Wild West movies, not the Wild West of Berkeley, California, or for that matter, all the other Western towns that many of you will know very well. But at the same time, in the exact period that the Homeric poems are coming to be, that's the 8th to the 6th centuries, the Western Mediterranean really was a space of Greek settlement. I realize this map is rather overwhelming, but what I wanted to point out is that every red line is the name of a different Greek city. And of course, many of those Greek cities are clustered around the Aegean Sea, around the area of modern-day Greece and modern-day Turkey, and all the islands. But you will notice that as big a cluster of these red lines is in South Italy, Sicily, and then sort of strung out a bit less along the coastline of the south of France and Spain. You will also notice all of these yellow dashes, which represent the names of Phoenician cities, because at exactly the same time as the Greeks were filling up the Western Mediterranean as a zone of settlement, the Phoenicians from the modern Middle East, from the modern Levant, approximately the area of modern-day Lebanon, maybe Israel, they were coming west to settle new places. What this meant is that the West was a kind of zone that was sort of known, but also a zone of opportunity and fascination. It was a world of settlers. It was a world of new cities, and especially it was a world of encounters with indigenous peoples, right? The arrival on a beach to encounter a strange community was an encounter that people in the world of Homer really were having all the time. beyond the specifics of the Western Mediterranean, just in general, I've been really struck this time by how much the landscapes and the seascapes of the Odyssey, especially in these four books, is the landscape and the seascape of the Mediterranean. Here's a nice imagined Greek settlement. The Mediterranean, of course, is famously lovely. That's why people want to go on holiday there. That's why my parents wanted to get away from rainy and cloudy Britain. Most of the time, it's a lovely place. The climate will be very familiar to us here in California. There is a short winter, which, however, is not just wet as we have it here, but also cold. So for a very short period of time, it's cold and wet. But for a much longer period of time in the Mediterranean, it is dry and warm. Now, there are two corollaries. One of them is for that period of cold and wet winter, it's very tough to sail in the Mediterranean. Storms in the Mediterranean are actually very common at a certain time of year. In antiquity, there was a sailing season, and then by implication, a non-sailing season. And it was tough to cross the Mediterranean in that non-sailing season, in that stormy season. And that's definitely part of this poem, right? Poseidon rushing up a storm against Odysseus's raft is definitely an experience of the Mediterranean Sea. We might think of the Mediterranean Sea as nice and gentle, where the super rich get together on their yachts. That's true of the summer, but it's not true of the winter. And the other thing is the sort of dark side of the long temperate summer is that it's really tough to grow things in the Mediterranean. If the summer is too dry and too long, agricultural goods are thin on the ground, and especially fruits, including wines and olives, are much more precarious to grow. And so this climate definitely shapes, I think, the world of the Odyssey, but also the world of real people today. And the other amazing thing about the Mediterranean is the tendency, because of the particular geology of the Mediterranean, to have really strong divides between the cultivable area, the plains and the river valleys, and the wild, the mountains, which are absolutely everywhere in the Mediterranean region. This amazing photo of a river valley in Thessaly in northern Greece, certainly the kind of place that the readers and the hearers of Homeric poetry would know well. You can see the very beautiful, fertile river valley and the tall, threatening mountains. That's actually Mount Olympus in the background. The wild was a space for hunters, but it was also a space for shepherds. And that meant that it was associated particularly with the goddess Artemis, who was the goddess of hunting. And she's really important, actually, especially in book 6 of this poem. So with that in mind, I came to think about these books of the Odyssey. I think I stopped sharing, if that's correct. Cecily can yell if I haven't done it right. Okay, so I want to just then bring it to coming from that view of the Mediterranean, my personal experience and what I know about it, about the Greeks and about the present. I just wanted to point out how all of this landscape and seascape appears here and there in these books. In particular, I think we can pick up very easily a distinction between the wild and the cultivable. The wild is really visible even from the beginning with the really remarkable description of Calypso's cave. This was a passage that in antiquity people were obsessed by and thought had deep allegorical meaning, which it does not. But it definitely is a really special passage of the possibility of a wild which is ideal and delightful. He found her inside. An enormous fire was burning upon the hearth. This is page 144. The aroma of blazing splits of wood, cedar, juniper, drifted all over the aisle while she lifted her lovely voice in song and wove back and forth at her loom with a golden shuttle. A luxuriant growth of trees spread all around the cave, alder and black poplar and sweet-smelling cypress as well, and the birds inside them were sleeping, their wings outstretched, little horned owls and hawks as well as cormorants, their chattering tongues stretched out, birds who work the sea. Round about the mouth of the hollow cave, a vine had been trained to climb. Now it flourished, bursting with clusters of grapes. 4 springs all in a row flowed with the clearest water, their streams running side by side, turning this way and that. All around, there were velvety meadows where violets and bay grass were growing lushly. Right. This is the wild. It's clearly not the cultivable. Calypso is doing nothing. It's interesting that the vine is trained, but that doesn't mean that she's designed it. It's just like it's arranged by nature. This is the ideal wild. The ancients called a passage like this, and in fact, this is the passage that they thought of when they thought of this, a locus amoenus, a description of a pleasant place, and it's always the wild. It is precisely not the city or the cultivable area. It is the best case scenario for the mountains, for the unsettled. On the other hand, essentially at the opposite end of the books that we're looking at is the Palace of Alcinous, which is really a dramatic description too of the cultivable. And this is page 171, lines 112 and following. Just beyond the courtyard, near the gateway, was a large orchard, a 4-acre lot with a fence that ran along either side. And actually, I'm not going to read all of this, but he grows fruit, and importantly, about line 117, 116, flourishing olives as well, right? This is the olive grove of Alcinous. The fruit of these trees never rots. And then he goes on, and there's a vineyard, and there is not a river, but a spring, which is ideal for the cultivable. And the passage ends with, noble Odysseus, who had suffered so much, marveled at the sight. Right? Just the sight of the cultivable is a marvel. And I think that this gap, the gap between Calypso's, it's beautiful, but it's wild, and Alcinous's marvelous orchard is the trajectory of these books. Odysseus travels from truly the outside, from the wild, in towards the settled, right? Him coming to Scheria, to the land of the Phaeacians, is a step home, right? It's a step back towards the human and eventually towards his own Ithaca. And I think that this pair of landscape descriptions captures actually a huge amount of the journey. And the linchpin of the transition between the wild and the settled is in between. And it's the coastline. As you will have noticed, at the end of book 5, Odysseus finally, he's caught in the storm, and then he finally makes it to land. And with a bit of help from Athena, of course. And at first, he's dashed against the cliffs, and it's no good. And his bones would have been smashed into pieces, it says, until he realizes that he can swim past the cliffs to the mouth of the river. And of course, a river mouth at the sea is the perfect metaphor for the moment of contact between the salt water and the fresh water, right? At this moment where he finds the mouth of the river, he is transitioning from the sea to the land. He's transitioning from the wild towards something closer towards the settled. And this is really one of my favorite moments in the entire poem, partly because of what it presages. He then needs to sleep. And by the banks of the river, he comes to a pair of olive trees. This is on page 156, lines 475. He went off toward the wood, which he found was quite close to the water, near a spot that was clear on all sides. There he came upon 2 bushes growing from a single trunk, an olive and a wild olive. Never did a gust of wind blast damply through their branches. Never did the burning sun break through them with its rays. Never did the rain pierce them. That's how thickly they had grown together and became intertwined. That this olive tree is going to provide a bed, but it is clearly a poetic image of the crossing from the wild and the dangerous and the outside into the tame, the civilized, right? For those of you who have not tried to grow olive trees are notoriously high maintenance. They take a lot of work. They're not easy. They're very sensitive. They don't do well under lots of different climatic and weather conditions. And so for this to be the image of a wild and a set and a planted by implication olive just seems so perfect for this moment of Odysseus moving from one to the other. My time is beginning to run short, but I do want to point out that this space of the coastline is also the space for Nausicaa. It's really not a coincidence that oh, I have missed a point. It's very important. I want you to hold this olive tree in your mind for the last books. When Leslie comes back for the final 4 books, the olive tree and bed, I just hold this as like, I've seen an olive tree bed before, because that's something that's really going to come back. It's going to be a fundamental part of this poem, one of the most important parts of the poem of all. So this is clearly an anticipation of that. So I just want you to hold the idea of an olive tree bed. But I just want to move on momentarily to Nausicaa, because it's no coincidence that this space of the between, the coastline, is the space of encountering Nausicaa. Nausicaa is introduced as someone who is moving from one stage of life to another. And that stage of life is girlhood to being a woman. And unlike Telemachus in the first 4 books, being a man, as Leslie explained to you last time, is about being like your father and going up there and sort of having some kind of mature personality. Unfortunately, being a woman and the transition from girlhood to womanhood is less a matter of fulfillment, more a transition between being the property of one's father and being the property of one's husband. And so it's quite clear that Nausicaa is a person on the cusp of exactly this transition. Athena, who's in disguise as ever, points out to her, you won't be a maiden for long, right? You won't be a girl for long, Parthenos. You're gonna be a married woman soon, and you need to go and do your laundry. But what's really interesting is that the narrator talks about when Nausicaa is leading the singing and the dancing. This is on page 160, about line 102. As white-armed Nausicaa led off the singing and the dancing, just as the archer Artemis will step down along the hills of Tigata's towering range. That's actually the mountain range in the first photo I showed you of the difference between the cultivar and the wild. Or on Erymanthos, taking delight in the boar and the deer with their swift feet, while around her wood nymphs, the daughter of Zeus who bears the aegis, are playing merrily, and Leto's heart is bursting with joy. And Artemis stands head and shoulders above the rest of the maidens, easy to spot from far off, though all of them are so lovely. So too did this unmarried maid stand out among her attendants. So Nausicaa is on the cusp of transition, but she's still got some Artemis in her. She's compared by the narrator to Artemis, and it's quite clear that part of the point is that she is not yet transitioned, that she may be married, but she has still got something of the oil. I want to say then, to close off, that the transition, that seascape and landscape, and being very aware of how the Mediterranean landscape actually is and how the narrator of this poem describes it, can really help us understand, I think, especially what's going on in books 5 to 7 of this, the transition of Odysseus from his starting point in the poem, right? We haven't met him in the first 4 books, so we meet him first in book 5 in the wild. And within these books, he's gone to the settled, to the human. And this is the key first step home. And so I think real attentiveness to landscape and seascape can really help us. I do want to do just one final thing, though. This is sort of for me. I'm hoping you can see this. My favorite novel is James Joyce's Ulysses, which I think is one of the reasons I like the Odyssey so much, is because I love Ulysses so much. This is a really amazing novel. As some of you will know, first published in 1922, and it tells the story of a single day in Dublin in 1906. But it uses the structure of the Odyssey to tell the story of various characters in modern Dublin. And my absolute favorite episode is the episode of Nausicaa, which is set not on a Mediterranean beach, but on the absolutely endlessly freezing cold beach of Sandymount Strand, right off Dublin. And in that episode, Bloom, who is the Odysseus figure, encounters a woman called Gertie McDowell, who is a young Dubliner. And it's in stream of consciousness. But what's so interesting about this episode is it's impossible to tell whose stream of consciousness we are hearing. Is it Gertie's, Nausicaa's, or is it Bloom, Odysseus? And it goes between them in this very difficult but kind of thrilling way. And I think what is so amazing about it is it picks up something which is so key to book 6 of the Odyssey, which is the difficulty, I think, in understanding this encounter between Nausicaa and Odysseus about exactly what each of them wants. Does Nausicaa want a husband? Does Odysseus feel desire for Nausicaa? Or is he just really focused on getting home? The question of motivation, what they actually think about each other, is incredibly hard to understand. And Joyce dramatizes this not through the external conversation, as in the archaic poem, but through their two interior monologues, which blur into each other, and also, in a kind of fascinating way, depend on 19th century pulp romance tropes. And part of the point is that neither of them can really imagine erotic desire beyond the kind of mediated world of a 19th century romance novel. It's just really fascinating and fantastic. And I love the Odyssey because I love Ulysses, and I couldn't resist leaving you on a Dublin beach. Okay, Cecily, so I think
Yeah.
that wraps us up. I just think we're probably a little short on time for questions, and we're going to move to the breakout rooms. So
Yeah. I think,
um, I
yeah.
I regret that, but we did some questions at the beginning, so I think that that's probably okay.
Thank you so much for being here. I feel like, I mean, I haven't read Ulysses since college, and now I'm like, I must go back. So thank you for such a rich talk and highlighting so many of the fascinating features of the landscape for us. And yes, we do have breakout rooms opening now, so you'll be able to choose where you go. And next week or not next week, but next time, we'll be back with Professors Shelton and Ernie. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you again, Professor MacRae.
Thank you. Thank you. I love this. This was so great.